Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a case today that is really going to stick with you. It's the story of Andrés Filomeno Mendoza. Yeah, Andrés Filomeno Mendoza.
Okay.
From Atizapán de Zaragoza, Mexico.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And this guy was a respected community figure, like everybody knew him.
Right.
But he was a serial killer.
Yeah, the duality of, somebody who can present as, an upstanding citizen and have this whole other life going on is just, it's terrifying.
Yeah, and this case really is a reminder that appearances can be deceiving.
Yeah, you never really know who you're dealing with.
You really don't.
Especially someone like Mendoza, who is so cunning and able to, keep this dark side hidden for so long.
Yeah, so to set the scene, we're going back to the 1980s in Atizapán.
Okay.
It was this quiet town that was right on the outskirts of Mexico City,
Mm-hmm.
and it was rapidly transforming into, a busy suburb.
Right. A lot of growth and change happening.
Exactly, and right in the midst of all this change was Mendoza.
Yeah, and he was like a fixture in the community.
He was a carnicero, a butcher.
A butcher, okay.
Everyone knew him. He was a familiar face.
Right, like someone you'd see every day at the market, someone you'd trust.
Exactly, and he even dabbled in local politics.
Wow, so really embedded in the community.
Oh, absolutely. He was like a pillar of the community.
And to think, all along, he was harboring such darkness.
I know, it's just... It's mind-blowing, It's hard to fathom that someone who was so well-respected, someone people trusted so deeply, could be capable of such horrific acts.
It really makes you question, how well you can ever truly know someone.
Yeah, and to fully grasp just how disturbing this case is, we have to go back to the beginning, with the disappearance of 34-year-old Reina Gonzalez Amador.
Reina Gonzalez Amador, okay.
Yeah, she was last seen with Mendoza.
And they knew each other.
Yeah, Mendoza had actually befriended both Reina and her husband, Bruno.
So he was close to the couple.
He was.
Wow, that's even more unsettling.
It is, and this disappearance, it set off this chain of events that would just forever change, like so many lives in Atizapán.
It's like a ripple effect, One event that just sends shockwaves through the entire community.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to highlight Bruno's role in all this.
Okay, what about Bruno?
Well, he was a former police officer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he had this, instinct.
Right, that investigative mindset.
Yeah, and this unwavering determination to find his wife.
He wasn't going to let this go unsolved.
Absolutely not. He knew that something was terribly wrong.
Of course.
And he wasn't going to let, the authorities' slow pace deter him at all.
So he took matters into his own hands.
He did. He went back to Mendoza's house.
Driven by a gut feeling.
Yeah, he knew, I think, deep down that something was really off.
I can only imagine the anxiety, the desperation he must have been feeling.
Oh, absolutely. And, he forced his way past Mendoza to get inside.
What? He, broke in?
Pretty much.
Wow. He must have been really convinced that something was wrong.
He was. And what he found. It's the kind of scene that just, it stays with you.
I can only imagine. What did he find?
He found Reina's mutilated body on a table.
On a table?
Yeah. Her organs were in buckets around the room.
Oh, my God. That is absolutely horrific.
It's a level of brutality that it's almost beyond words.
It's pure evil.
It is. And as if that wasn't enough, while Bruno was making this horrifying discovery, Mendoza tried to escape.
Oh, he tried to run.
He did, but thankfully Bruno had already called the police.
He had the foresight to do that, even in the midst of all that chaos.
He did, and they were able to apprehend Mendoza as he was trying to flee.
Wow, so close.
So close.
It's chilling to think that he almost got away.
I know, it's right there. He could have just disappeared.
But that detail, him trying to escape, it really speaks volumes.
It does.
He knew what he had done, and he was desperate to avoid the consequences.
Yeah, but for Bruno and for the families of so many others, this was just the beginning of a really agonizing journey for answers.
A journey that would lead them down a very dark path, I'm sure.
It would. As the police started investigating Mendoza's home, they found the remains of at least 4 other people.
4 other people. So it wasn't just Reina.
It wasn't. And they found women's belongings, IDs, videotapes.
Videotapes. What was on the videotapes?
I'll get to that, but this is where it gets really disturbing.
Okay.
They found a list with 29 names on it.
29 names. What was it? Like a hit list?
That's what investigators believed. They think it was a catalog of Mendoza's potential victims.
Oh, my God. That sends chills down my spine just thinking about it.
And it points to a pattern of premeditation. This wasn't just some, crime of passion.
No, this was calculated, systematic.
Exactly, a long-term plan.
And it became clear that they weren't dealing with just a one-time killer. They were dealing with a serial killer.
They were, and he had potentially been operating for decades.
Decades. That's just, it's unfathomable.
Oh, no, just think about that. Decades.
Yeah. Living a double life for that long, all the while maintaining this facade of respectability, it's mind-boggling.
It really is. Like, how can someone compartmentalize their actions to such an extent?
Yeah, how can you be so integrated into a community while simultaneously committing these horrific acts?
It just doesn't make sense.
It defies logic.
It really does. And what's even more unsettling is that Mendoza, he didn't shy away from confessing to his crimes.
Oh, he confessed.
He did. He gave these chillingly detailed accounts of how he lured women from bars in Tolnapantla.
Tolnapantla, isn't that close to Atizapin?
It's really close. It's like a stone's throw away.
So he was going outside of his immediate community to find victims.
He was, and he confessed that he killed them because they rejected his advances.
Oh, so it was like a twisted sense of revenge.
Yeah, and get this. He even admitted to consuming parts of their bodies.
Oh, God, that's beyond comprehension.
It's truly horrific, but his confession, it does give us a glimpse into his psyche, however disturbing it may be.
Yeah, it shows us his motivations, his twisted logic.
Exactly, and it all stemmed from this, like, warped sense of entitlement.
And a profound rage against those who rejected him.
Yeah, and remember those videotapes I mentioned?
The ones they found in his house?
Yeah, he meticulously documented his crimes.
Like, he filmed everything.
He did. He even recorded the dismemberment of his victims.
That's beyond disturbing.
It is. It's another level of horror.
And it speaks to a level of planning that's truly unsettling.
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't just some random act of violence. This was calculated. It was deliberate.
Yeah, there was a method to his madness.
There really was.
Yeah.
And then there's the basement.
What about the basement?
Mendoza had soundproofed it.
Soundproofed it? Why would he do that?
He created a chamber of horrors down there.
Oh, my God.
That's where he carried out a lot of his crimes.
So he had a dedicated space for his atrocities.
He did, and he would lure his victims there under false pretenses.
Like he would pretend to offer help or companionship.
Yeah, exactly. And the premeditation, the way he created this dedicated space, it just speaks to a cold, calculated cruelty.
It's like he constructed this alternate reality in his basement.
It's like he was living a double life, not just in the community, but within his own home.
A place where he could enact his darkest fantasies, completely detached from the life he presented to the world above.
Yeah, and it begs the question, were there any signs, any red flags that people missed?
Could anything have been done to stop him before it reached this point?
Those are questions that, they continue to haunt the families of the victims and the community.
I can't imagine the guilt, the what-ifs that must plague them.
And as the investigation deepened, even more heartbreaking stories started to emerge.
Stories from other families who had been searching for their loved ones.
Exactly. Families who'd been searching for years.
Years of not knowing, of holding on to hope.
And suddenly, they're confronted with the realization that their loved one had fallen victim to Mendoza's brutality.
It's just devastating.
It is. And one story that really stands out is that of Mathilde.
Okay, tell me about Mathilde.
She had been looking for her sister, Maria, and her nephew, Edgar.
They were missing.
Yeah, they vanished on Christmas Eve in 2016.
Christmas Eve, how awful.
I know, and can you imagine the pain, the
The
uncertainty?
years of not knowing, it's just unimaginable.
The nightmare. And it turns out Mendoza was the last person to see them.
Oh my God, he was.
He was, and he even went with Mathilde to the police when she reported them missing.
He had the audacity to do that.
He did. He feigned concern, offered his support.
It's just despicable.
It is. And tragically, it seems like the authorities didn't fully investigate Mendoza at the time.
They didn't.
They didn't. It was a missed opportunity that might have had just devastating consequences.
This is a sobering thought.
It is. And it really highlights the systemic issues that often plague missing persons cases.
Yeah, like the lack of resources, the biases.
Yeah, and there's this real need for increased awareness and sensitivity when it comes to handling these cases, especially when the victims are women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to be more vigilant as a society.
We do. More attentive to the vulnerabilities that exist.
And quicker to respond when someone goes missing.
You're right, but for now, let's delve deeper into the stories of the other victims and see how this investigation unfolded.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more.
All right, let's go.
So many families were torn apart by Mendoza's actions.
It's heartbreaking to think about,
Yeah.
And we know about Mathilde's search, but there are other stories that are just as devastating.
Right, like every victim had their own life, their own loved ones.
Exactly. Take the families of Marta Andrade and Rubicela Gallegos Castillo.
Okay.
Both of those women, they just disappeared. No trace.
Leaving behind families who just, I mean, they spent years
Years.
grappling with these unanswered questions,
And the pain.
the pain of not knowing.
It's agonizing.
Yeah, it's like a wound that never heals.
It is. And these stories, they really humanize the statistics,
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers,
Right.
but we have to remember that behind the headlines, behind all those chilling details, there are real people whose lives were they were forever altered by Mendoza's cruelty.
Yeah, their pain, their search for closure, it's a stark reminder of the human cost of these horrific crimes.
It's a heavy weight to carry.
It is, and the scale of the investigation itself was just staggering.
Okay, how so?
Imagine trying to piece together the lives of potentially 19 victims.
19?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From over 4,300 bone fragments.
4,300.
Yeah.
That's a monumental task.
It was, and it's a testament to the dedication of the forensic experts. I mean, they worked tirelessly to identify the remains and just, bring some measure of closure to those families.
It's a painstaking process.
It is. It requires such a specific level of expertise and sensitivity.
Yeah, and you have to be so careful and respectful when dealing with human remains.
Absolutely. And in Mendoza's case, it unveiled this truly horrifying detail.
Oh, what's that?
The possibility that he might have sold human meat to his neighbors.
He sold human meat?
That's what they think, yeah.
Oh my God, that's a whole other level of depravity.
It is. And can you imagine the horror of unknowingly consuming something like that?
It sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it.
It does. It's like it adds this whole other layer to his crime.
Yeah, it's almost like he was mocking his victims, even in death.
And what's really disturbing is that Mendoza, he seemed so confident he would escape justice.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't just about being careful or covering his tracks. He genuinely seemed to believe that he was untouchable.
Like he was above the law.
Yeah, and that arrogance, I think, it reflects a much larger issue in Mexico.
Okay, what's that?
The impunity rate.
The impunity rate.
Yeah, it's shockingly high.
How high are we talking?
Only about 1 in 1,000 crimes actually result in a verdict.
1 in 1,000?
Yeah.
That's incredibly low.
It is, and it creates this environment where criminals, they just feel emboldened.
Like they can get away with anything.
Exactly. And Mendoza's case, it's a prime example of how this failure can have just devastating consequences.
Yeah, he was able to operate for years.
Years.
Preying on vulnerable women.
Because he was secure in the belief that he would never be held accountable.
And that's the truly terrifying part. The system was failing these victims.
It was, and it underscores the need for a more, robust justice system.
One that's actually responsive and takes all crimes seriously, no matter who the victim is.
Exactly. And that brings us to Mendoza's sentence.
Okay, what was his sentence?
In March 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison.
Life in prison for the murder of Reina Gonzalez Amador.
Right.
And what about the other victims?
He was also fined and ordered to pay reparations to Reina's family.
But nothing for the other families.
And the judge determined that Mendoza's actions were premeditated and driven by just, a hatred of women.
So a clear case of gender-based violence.
Absolutely. But while justice was served in this instance,
it's a small victory in this much larger problem.
It is. And the fact that so many other families are still searching for answers.
Still waiting for justice.
It speaks volumes about the challenges that lie ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
There is. It's a long and arduous road, but it's one we have to travel.
We can't give up.
Okay.
Yeah.
We need to keep pushing for reforms, for greater transparency and accountability within the system.
We need to hold those in power responsible.
We do. And beyond those systemic issues, I think we need to address those societal attitudes that contribute to this culture of impunity.
What do you mean?
There's often this stigma attached to missing persons cases,
Right, like victim blaming.
Yeah, and it can lead to delays in investigations.
And a lack of public awareness.
Exactly. We need to shift that narrative.
We need to create a culture where every missing person is treated with, urgency and respect.
No matter their background, their circumstances.
We need to listen to their families.
Believe their stories.
And advocate for their right to justice.
We need to be their voice.
Their champion.
We need to demand better from our institutions, from each other.
It's a collective responsibility.
It is. And we need to start having these difficult conversations about the root causes of violence against women.
About gender inequality.
The systemic biases that they permeate our society.
Those uncomfortable truths.
But they're truths we can't ignore anymore.
We have to face them head on.
We do. We need to acknowledge the role that misogyny plays, and prejudice.
And a lack of empathy.
in perpetuating these kinds of crimes.
It's a call to action.
It is a call to hold ourselves and our communities accountable for creating a safer, more just world.
For everyone.
For everyone. But for now, let's shift our focus back to Mendoza.
Okay.
We've discussed the horrors he committed, the failings that allowed him to operate for so long.
The impact on his victims and their families.
But what about the man himself?
Yeah, who is Andrés Filomeno Mendoza behind the mask?
Let's find out. How could someone like Mendoza, seemingly ordinary, respected, commit such heinous acts? It's a question that just lingers, you know?
Yeah, what goes on in the mind of someone who can live this double life?
Right, compartmentalizing their actions like that, it's extreme.
It's a question that's baffled, criminologists, psychologists, everyone for centuries.
And there's no easy answer, is there?
No, not really. There's no, profile that fits every serial killer.
Right.
No magic formula.
So where do we even begin to try to understand someone like Mendoza?
Well, I think it's important to remember that evil doesn't always present itself in some, obvious way.
Right, it can be hidden.
Yeah, behind a charming smile, a helpful demeanor, a carefully constructed facade of normalcy.
And Mendoza was a master at that, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He was able to gain the trust of his community, blend in seamlessly.
All the while just harboring these dark, twisted fantasies.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that we can't always judge a book by its cover.
We really can't.
Sometimes the most unassuming people, are capable of the most unimaginable acts.
And that's what makes this case so unsettling.
It is. It shatters our illusions about who we can trust.
I keep thinking about Mendoza's basement, that soundproof chamber.
Yeah.
It reminds me of other serial killer cases, where they construct these spaces to separate themselves from the reality of their crimes.
Right. It's like they need to create this physical and psychological barrier.
To detach from the humanity of their victims.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really speaks to that level of premeditation.
The compartmentalization.
It's chilling.
It's like they're building a stage for their dark fantasies.
The world where their own logic reigns supreme.
And it's terrifying to think about. And, I think it's important to acknowledge that while we may never fully understand what drives someone to do this,
right,
we can't just dismiss them as monsters.
No, we have to delve deeper.
Yeah.
Try to understand the factors that contribute to such depravity,
The psychological vulnerabilities.
Societal influences, personal experiences that shape their worldview.
Because if we can understand the roots of that evil,
then maybe we can prevent it.
So what does all of this mean for you, the listener?
I think it's call to action.
Yeah.
To be more aware, pay attention to the people in your lives, and trust your instincts.
When something feels off.
Yeah, evil often hides in plain sight.
It does.
It's up to all of us to be vigilant, to be courageous, and to speak up.
When we see something that's not right.
Absolutely. We need to cultivate empathy and compassion.
Not just for the victims, but for everyone involved.
Because understanding that darkness, that's the first step towards preventing it from spreading.
We started this deep dive exploring the shocking case of Andrés Filomeno Mendoza, the man who went from respected community member to convicted serial killer.
We went through the gruesome details, the failures that allowed him to operate for so long.
The devastating impact.
But what we've really uncovered is a story about the human condition, about the good and evil that exists in us all.
It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths.
About ourselves and about the world.
It challenges us to be better.
More aware.
And to never stop fighting for a world where justice prevails.
Where these horrors are just a distant memory.
And that's where we leave you today. We journeyed together into the darkness, but it's now up to each of us to carry the light forward. Be vigilant, be compassionate, be the change.